Hey guys, let's talk about something called ionic bonds. So, ionic bonds are one type of chemical bonds, which we'll talk about this unit, this chapter. And so, chemical bonds are the glue that hold atoms together, or not atoms, sorry, molecules together. So, what holds H2O together and carbon dioxide, CO2? Well, it's chemical bonds. And there's three main types: ionic bonds, covalent bonds, and metallic bonds. But today we're going to focus on ionic bonds here. So one thing is an ionic bond joins together a metal and a non-metal. And in our previous unit, we saw where those were. So if we look on our table here, everybody from the middle over to here to this little stair, and this is the same periodic table you have, all of these guys, including these guys down here, they are the metals. And then everybody over on this side, and then hydrogen, so hydrogen is the one exception, they are the non-metals. So whenever you have a metal joined with a non-metal, it's an ionic bond that holds those together. So here's some examples of some ionic bonds. So silver chloride and magnesium iodide and aluminum oxide are all held together by ionic bonds. The metal, silver, magnesium, and aluminum, I've written in blue here. And the nonmetal, chlorine, which we'll get to in a future lesson, we call chloride when it's an ionic bond. Iodine, which we call iodide when it's an ionic bond, and oxygen, which we call oxide when it's in an ionic bond. Those three are the non-metals there. So the rules for why this happens is pretty simple. So there's basically a starting point here. We're going to start with separate atoms, both of them neutral. So remember, one of them has to be a metal atom. Let's say that this is sodium. And let's say we have a non-metal atom, and this is chlorine. So we're going to join together and make sodium chloride, probably the most famous ionic bond. You probably just call it sodium or table salt. So that's what sodium chloride is. So the next step there is that the metal will give the non-metal an electron, like this. So here's the metal. Oh, can you see it? Let me scooch these out of here. So the metal, which is sodium in this case, will give the non-metal an electron over here. So that transfer takes place. So when that happens, once the metal gives the non-metal an electron, these are no longer neutral atoms because their electrons and protons don't balance. So now the atoms become charged. And they become charged because this metal atom has lost an electron, and the metal always loses an electron. Because it lost an electron, there are now more protons than electrons, and it gains a positive charge there. The nonmetal gained an electron, and the nonmetal always gains the electron. Because it gained an electron, it now has more electrons than protons, and it gets a negative charge. So now both our atoms are charged, one positive, one negative. Well, what happens to oppositely charged particles? Or they become attracted to each other. So the metal atom is positive, the non-metal atom is negative, and they pull each other together. And that electrostatic force is what holds those two atoms together. And now we have a sodium chloride molecule. Sodium and chlorine join together, make sodium chloride.